Welcome, everybody. It's good to see everybody back for another week. Appreciate you coming out. We've got a very fun topic today, state parties, how they interact in races, in politics, what the future holds. As Bill pointed out, I am to stage front on the far right, which is a little different for me, but Bill, I would point out from your point of view, I'm still far left. So we have three great guests joining us today. Vicki Hiatt is the vice chair of the Kansas Democratic Party and a Kansas alum. You will find that that is a recurring motif amongst all of us here. Jim Joice, the current executive director of the Kansas Republican Party, also a recent Kansas alum, and Ken Martin, chair of the Minnesota DFL, the Democratic Farmer Laborers. Labor Party, got it. And also a vice chair of the DNC and chairman of the Association of State Democratic Chairs. Correct. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it very much. Let's give them a warm welcome. Just like in weeks past, we're going to keep this fairly informal. We're encourage you to ask questions throughout. If you do have a question, raise your hand. One of our intrepid volunteers will be over with a microphone so that everyone online can hear what you're asking and saying. And so with that, let's jump right in. What is the role of a state party? We all know what it is, and most people think they know how it works, but that may not be accurate as well. And I'm going to this is the first time we've had three people in this discussion session, so bear with me. I'll try to vary the starting point here. But Ken, let's start with you. What is the role of a state party?
Well, I think one of the challenges is it depends on who you ask. And I am the president of the State Chairs Association, and one of the things that I want to make sure all of my colleagues around the country understand that their role is really one thing, which is to win elections and to help build long-lasting and permanent infrastructure. The role of a party, really in my opinion, is to focus not only on building that infrastructure, but doing it in a way that every 2 years you don't have to recreate the wheel. When I was elected chair, someone said, well, boy, I'm surprised you're running for this position. I said, why? Well, you're a campaign guy. And I said, and so? And they said, well, we're part of a movement. We're about the issues. We're about movement building. And I said, sure, of course, parties are part of the movement. But our niche within the movement is to actually win elections. And by doing so, candidates come and go. We've seen many candidates over the years that run, and the next time they don't, or some that run multiple times. The reality is that our job is to build that infrastructure so candidates and campaigns can plug into it and not have to build it on their own.
Jim,
pretty well put. I mean, losers don't legislate. So the part of winning elections is definitely, the most important part of it. But what we try to do and what we pride ourselves on is being the main hub of information, resources, and materials. So we have 6 statewide, 125 House, Senate, Gov. We've kind of got the full slate. So we've got a lot of different people to deal with, and they really rely on us for the materials, the resources, the networking, and the infrastructure. I mean, that's a really big part of it, but also introducing them to donors, who's the specific person to talk to in each county. It's kind of an all hands on deck type of deal. So
I like that losers don't legislate line. I'm gonna use that actually with some candidates. I've said many similar things, but I will credit you for that. That's fantastic.
We're getting in trouble now.
Vicki.
I think the building the infrastructure has been, for us here in Kansas, that's been something that we've focused on since the chair and I have taken over. And I ran for office for a House seat in 2014. And so I became very aware of how important it is for a candidate to not have to rebuild that. So we're working very hard throughout the state, as far as the Kansas Democratic Party, to make sure we're in every county and make sure we've got activity going on and we don't let down after an election. We've got to keep it going and just keep that enthusiasm and that interest up and keep training people, because I think there's a big part of training that's involved from the state party.
I want to come back to a piece there, but all three of you have mentioned infrastructure, and that's part of what you provide. For the previous 4 weeks, 5 weeks, we have been talking a lot about the infrastructure on campaigns, whether that's polling, whether that's fundraising, it's field and targeting and data, et cetera. What infrastructure do you think what does infrastructure mean for you, and what are the biggest pieces you provide to candidates? And I guess there are multiple groups. There are candidates and there are local parties. From the Republican point of view, what are the biggest tools you provide, and what does infrastructure mean for you?
It's definitely the networking aspect of it, is making sure if you have a new candidate, or say in our gubernatorial election right now, I heard our chair explain it as we're kind of driving down the highway and we're waiting for someone to hop in, while the primary was still in a showdown between Governor Collier and nominee Kobach. And so that's what we provide. Regardless of who wins our primary, you get the full slate. You get everything that we have, the access to all of our donors, the access to our resources, our polling, our firms, what's worked, what hasn't, message testing in different areas, the whole shebang. And it's everything from the local leaders and who can organize walks and phone banks on certain nights, to getting people in at various KUCRs and things like that, expanding and organizing. So it's kind of all of the above, but that's what we pride ourselves on, and that's what we give our candidates, and that's the benefit you get when you win the primary. We've got a lot to offer.
It is, I think the infrastructure really is about, especially giving support to county parties, and that's where we've been really looking to get, because that's where the grassroots comes from, helping county chairs get precinct committee people and organizing to the point that those people are invested in working toward getting candidates elected and have a good understanding. I know that I am from Johnson County in Kansas, and that's a big hub, and there's been a huge amount of enthusiasm. And so getting all of those volunteers who are coming in and giving them the training, and so many of them are brand new to politics. So the state party and the county parties are really, most effective in helping get those people off the ground and going.
Yeah, I think, I always say there's 3 stakeholders for state parties. The first is your activists and your party leaders, the folks who are on the ground actually doing a lot of the work. The second is your candidates and elected officials, and the third are your donors and allies, people on the outside who are working in electoral spaces that you have to work with. All 3 of them have different needs. All of them have the same goal and outcome, which is winning elections. And so, the party's job is to help facilitate that. So for us, it's making sure that our party serves as a center of gravity, making sure that all of those 3 sort of stakeholder groups, instead of setting up their own outside efforts, they're actually coordinating and working with state parties through what we call coordinated campaigns. We make sure that all of the people that are on the Democratic side of Minnesota who are working in electoral politics are actually working with and through the state party. That's really important, and so that just setting up that infrastructure of creating that center of gravity, making sure that people are working together, sharing resources, not duplicating efforts. But again, in terms of permanency of building infrastructure, it's everything from volunteer lists to lawn sign lists to data. We collect data on every door we knock. When we talk to someone, we are creating data points. That data is very valuable to the next candidate, right? And so what we want to do is make sure when a candidate or anyone else who wants to work in politics, they don't have to start from scratch. They're almost handed a campaign in a box with all the resources that we've created through the course of the campaign cycle.
Very nice. Just a quick, I'm going to come back to your county party versus candidates, and I want to ask how a party balances the need to be everywhere and to be targeted, right? Which is tough. It's political science, but really it's an art, right? But before I ask that, all of you have mentioned access to information, and we had a couple of gentlemen here, a couple of guests a few weeks ago talking about the voter file and data on campaigns and how it's available. How do candidates access the voter file in your state area? And Vicki, I'll start with you.
Well, they do access it through the state party primarily, and as a candidate comes on and they notify us, or we get notification that they're running, We usually reach out and offer that. That's one of the many services that we can provide candidates. Although we don't run campaigns, we can help them with especially that. And I know in my experience when I was getting my feet wet in this, that was the most fantastic thing. I thought, it's like, wow, this is such a great tool to be able to use, because it's your direct link to your voters and how you can know who to talk to and get out to reach out to them.
Well, every state is unique in terms of how they provide access to the voter file. On the Democratic side, one thing to recognize is that we created a national voter file coming out of the 2004 election cycle. Before that, every state party had their own contracts with various vendors, which made it very hard for national presidential campaigns and the party to run any sort of national programming. So after the 2004 Kerry campaign, the DNC decided to create this national voter file. But the state parties retained ownership over their data, and every state party has different access levels as well as costs that they charge candidates and other partners to use that data. In Minnesota, you know, my mantra is not to make money off the backs of our candidates, our partners, so we have to charge something for data. We have to charge fair market value for that. But we really don't charge beyond that because, again, we're not trying to make money off the backs of people who need data. If we could give it away for free, we would.
The access levels, I mean, that's definitely the most important part. And, you know, Republicans in Kansas, the data's the gold mine. And there's always going to be primaries. And, you know, in 2018, all of these people are on our team, and they're all our official candidates. In 2020, you know, we could be looking at a 6-way Senate primary, and, you know, who did we give information to, and when, and why, and, you know, what was it? So we're pretty loose with, we have the GOP data center, so it's essentially the same thing that the Democrats did on our side, but then we also work with vendors, and that's kind of your more detailed, issue-oriented data, and what you can use to be much more specific and targeted and a lot more effective. And so that largest one would be I-360, which is, you know, headed by the Koch brothers right here in Kansas. So we've got.
I've heard of them.
Yeah. I think everyone has. So we've got a gold mine with them, and what's going on with all the data that we're collecting through that, and we make sure that we're collecting data on everything. You know, every touch we have, we're collecting data or finding a way. You know, the president just came, and we had 26,000 people ask for a ticket. You know, we've got first, last names, emails, cell phones, addresses, zips, everything on these people, and so, you know, we can create an entire universe for them when we're doing GeoTV. And, you know, these are people who we're going to stand 3 hours outside for the president. So probably
base voter.
Probably one touch reminder. Yeah, we'll get them there. You don't have to do mail or a text or double up on them.
Right.
And so that's kind of the way that we manage our data. And we got to be a little more careful about it, considering how many we have.
Yeah. So let me come back to, how do you manage? There are a lot of jobs of a state party, and part of it, this debate, which for the 20 years I've been in politics, everybody has an opinion, right? Should the state party be everywhere helping everyone, or should they be targeted and allocating resources in some way, shape, or form? How do you balance that kind of decision? I forgot where I left off. I think I'm going to put you in the hot seat first, Ken. Congratulations. How do you balance that? Because there's not you don't have enough money to do everything you want to do. So how do you prioritize the need to provide the basic services and help win? Because losers don't legislate.
Well, I think you have to start with the mentality that, look, we have a motto at the DFL. It's called build to win, build to last. So what are we doing to build right now to win elections? Because that's what I'm going to be judged up by at the end of this election, and we all are. But are we building to last? And do we have a vision that it actually is starting to expand the map? I don't believe there's parts of my state or even parts of this country that are not winnable. But one of the things that Howard Dean did in 2005 as he came in as chair of the Democratic Party is institute a new series of proposals called the 50-state strategy, which many of you have probably heard of. And it was really revolutionary. It's the idea with, you know, investment of time, energy, and yes, some money. Even some of those ruby red areas could become purple and then maybe eventually blue. And of course, what Howard Dean did nationally from 2005 to 2009, in my opinion, he doesn't get enough credit for what happened in 2008 with President Obama. Sure, President Obama was a transformational candidate, not taking anything away from his campaign. But the foundation for that campaign was set through a real investment of resources, time, and energy, even in red states in the South and other parts of this country. So for me as a party chair, I take that same approach, both in my role with the ASDC, the State Chairs Association. When I was elected with Chairman Perez nationally, I brought to him a plan that was what I would call the 50-state strategy on steroids, a much deeper and more meaningful and robust investment in state parties throughout the country. And why is that important? Again, because we have to get back to basics as Democrats. Over the last 8 years, we've lost over 1,000 seats around the country. I don't blame President Obama for this, but part of the reason why is because we stripped capacity away from state parties. And we created a parallel organization known as OFA, and you had these two competing centers of the state and local party committees and the national committee with OFA competing for volunteers and other resources. So part of us, what we're doing is trying to get back to basics of building that foundation so we can be successful everywhere. In my state, I created a program called the Red to Blue program. So we have 134 legislative candidates this year. All of them receive equal levels of candidate support. Now the top candidates, which are about 30, receive even more support, but there's no candidate that is on the ballot that is ignored. And part of that is we need to understand that if we're recruiting candidates to run for office, the least we can do is provide them support and services. That costs money, sure. And there's people who probably say to me, why are you doing that? We should be putting it all into this district. You have to have the long-term vision about how you build your party to last, and that's really important to me. You can't just be myopically focused on the election. And I think the committees in Washington, probably on the Republican side too, are myopically focused, and I don't blame them. The DCCC has to win so many races this year. The DS has to win so many races. All these committees in D.C., they're focused on November 6th. They don't care about what happens on November 7th. But remember what I said earlier, the parties are the permanent institution. The day after the election, we're still here, the candidates aren't. So we have to have the long-term vision. Sorry for the long answer.
No, that's all right. Hang on, let's...
Obama for America.
Yeah, the question is, what is OFA? And that was Obama for America and transformed to Organizing for Action.
Correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry, using all these acronyms, I apologize.
No worries, no worries. You're in the thick of it. How do you balance this out? Because I mean, having worked on campaigns that I thought weren't getting enough resources, I've been the one clamoring, saying, why aren't you spending more here, right? How do you balance this out?
So we do try to be everywhere, but you're always going to let some people down. I mean, you can't be everywhere, but in Kansas, we're a little spoiled, so we can take a step back, and this is my favorite part, but it's chessboard. And so if we're trying to drive turnout in the big one, and maybe the top of the ticket isn't the way to do it, we've got an awesome attorney general, a state treasurer, an insurance commissioner, or House districts that we can focus on and pump money into and drive turnout there. And then the other thing we have in Kansas that we're lucky enough to have is that historically speaking, when you get a Republican to the poll, they're going to vote Republican up and down. So I'm not worried about if you're voting for Chris Kobach, if you're voting for Kevin Yoder, or if you're voting for Steve Watkins. I'm worried if you're going to vote. And so it's a different tactic that we take, but it makes it fun. You can spend here, spend there, and spend where you're moving the needle. We talked a little bit about the 3rd district, but is $1 million really going to move the needle there that much? Or how much will it move the needle in the 2nd district? And are you running for a specific candidate? Are you going candidate oriented, or is it just a generic Republican? And what we've seen and what I kind of highlighted is that sometimes the generic Republican's better. And all we have to do is focus on getting a certain set of voters to the polls, and we know we'll win. So it's not so much this issue or this campaign, it's this block of voters that we need to show up, and we're going to attack them through various avenues.
I would reiterate much of the same. It is about, but we've really taken on what the DNC has chosen to be in all over the state as much as we can. Of course, we were able to find candidates for all 125 House seats, but we are the ones who have stepped up and offered to run. We're helping all of those candidates as far as the state party. So we provide the voter file training for the candidates. And I personally have traveled around the state to do some trainings, and then we followed up with some one-on-one consultations just to help them out. Because a lot of, especially for a House race, candidates can't always afford big-time consultations. So we're trying to help every candidate. I think that, like Ken said, that's important. But then, of course, the numbers tell you which races are probably going to be ones that we can invest a little bit more in. And it may be with just more attention and helping with bigger fundraising events going on in some of those areas. So
Sure.
there are other ways.
So let's turn to a fun question that I'm certain you all, now we're only 20 days out, this is not a consideration, but prior to this, primaries, right? Does the state party have an obligation to be incumbent protection? How do you make a decision how to get involved, when to get involved in a primary? Your analogy of the bus was great, right? We're here driving, whoever wins can get in, but do you maintain neutrality? Do you get involved? Like, how is that decision process?
We try really hard to. There's certainly, a group of people who are, what are you doing? Or this is an incumbent governor, what's going on here? And we've had these conversations from, our most grassroots folks to the White House. And for a long time, we thought we were going to have no one get involved. And then the day before, someone did, the president. So,
You didn't have control over that? He didn't call you and say, hey, is this a good idea?
That's right.
I can't imagine he would do
His
something
advisors
impulsive.
do. His advisors do. But, I think we all know what happened. So, it's just rolling with the punches. There's never a dull moment. It's not really our position, in my position especially. I'm not elected. I'm appointed by a board. It's not my position to be weighing in on the direction the party's going to go. So, I have my personal favorite in a primary, but I'm not elected. The voters didn't entrust me with this right to pick which way the party's going. So it's a little bit of just knowing your role and being there and being a team player, and we're going to run with whoever we get, and that's kind of how it breaks down. We're used to it. It's not the first time we've had contested primaries. It definitely won't be the last. So it's a good challenge.
Does that, just as a quick follow-up, is that the same calculus used for like State House? You have primaries there. Do you make a case by case? Is it, we have a general policy of, incumbent protection, we don't get involved? How does that calculus work? And
So
I'm going to ask the same of everyone here.
The party stays neutral,
Okay.
on face value, but there's a lot of affiliate organizations out there, definitely in Kansas, and they play in primaries, and for the most part, the best return on your investment in Kansas politics is going to be playing in Republican primaries. Mm-hmm. Whichever way some of these seats go, Republicans are going to pass bills in the House and Senate and maybe have the veto pen. So it's good business to have Republicans on your side. So the best return on your investment would be spending in the primary, expecting an easier general than to just spend on the Republican versus a nameless Democrat. Not to say they're nameless, just
Right.
outside looking in, just
Right.
a random race.
Yep.
Because you're promoting your specific values and what you're looking for directly in the primary. In the general, it's a little bit different.
The neutrality is the key. This is my second year as vice chair, and so being at this level, I will tell you, primary probably was the most nerve-wracking time for me, because and the good news, though, in Kansas, for any of you who've been around for a while, this was one of the first years we've had some significant primary races going on at the gubernatorial level, and Congressional District 3 was a big primary. So, yeah, there was easy in terms of, okay, we can't jump on board and maintain anything, but it was nerve-wracking in just watching the race, go back, wondering when, and just knowing that we had to be ready after, day one, after the primary, to whoever wins, get on board and help them out. So, but neutrality.
And the same in Minnesota?
No,
Neutrality?
and in fact, I think the Minnesota DFL is somewhat unique this way. There's maybe a couple other states who do get involved in primaries, but we actually have conventions at every level: city council, state legislative, congressional, all the way up to our statewide races. and those conventions make endorsements. With endorsement comes access to the voter file, access to party resources, money, all those other pieces, volunteers. If you don't have the endorsement, you don't have access to any of the party resources.
That sounds like a very Minnesota thing.
It is, but what it does, what it has resulted in is a very large and robust party because people really seek the endorsement. They know that there's value to it. It's not just endorsement on paper, but there's those party resources are really important in a primary. So, you know, if you don't have access to a voter file in a Democratic primary, you're sort of at a disadvantage. And so, you know, in Minnesota, we don't protect incumbents. We protect our endorsement. We defend our endorsement fiercely because we believe that the grassroots should have a voice in who is representing our party. And so there are times where incumbents actually lose their endorsement and then end up losing their primary. And that's the way it should be. I mean, there should be accountability back to the grassroots for sure and to voters, and that's the way our party works. I understand, you know, especially the 2016 primary, how primaries can be bad in some cases, right? Particularly for a national party, but state parties are oftentimes put into a really tough position where they have to either stay out completely, and that ends up putting them at a disadvantage because they're not really cranking on all cylinders by the time they get to a general election, or they decide to get involved and in some cases end up on the wrong side of that. And so every state is a little unique in how they handle this on the Democratic side. Probably ours is the most unique. So
It's a lot
Sounds
of
like a lot of fun.
it's fun, yeah.
We are being recorded,
Yeah.
so let me flip the question a little bit. What are some of the things that people expect state parties to do that they don't, right? An unreasonable expectation, and Jim, I'll start with you.
Well, I'd just say you talked a little bit about the organization and the employee list. You know, we're looking at a party of one, wear a lot of hats.
Oh, you're the only employee of the Kansas?
That's right. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a handful.
I would have introduced you with a much longer title: the executive director, field director, research director, finance director. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, so that's pretty much the main misconception. You know, I used to work for Congressman Yoder, did a stint with Majority Leader Denning, and then was running Mark Hutton's campaign. And so the first thing I do is go back to some of my old donors, and they imagine me in, plush leather seats, 18 employees, got a big round table, looking like The Apprentice, essentially. And it could not be any more different. And the second we get $1, it's going right back out the door to bank a boat. So we're not sitting on a rainy day fund by any means or anything like that. And if you see big financial reports, the very next month you'll see the expenditures that they're right back out. So that's the big misconception, that it's some 25 employee type deal. That's not the way we work, but we work together with a lot of our electeds, very well in every single campaign committee. So that's how we kind of make up for some of that, and just making sure that we're using all of our resources and like you said, not doubling down in areas that we don't need to be. And so that's kind of the main part that we try to facilitate there.
Party of one. I had no idea. That's
living the dream.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
A little bit of both.
There's a great meme that I've used in the past. It's kind of 6 different pictures. It's like what my parents think I do, what I think I do, what the volunteers think I do about campaign work, and it's fantastic. But it fits that exactly, right? And then there's one that what the opponent thinks I do, the other side thinks I do, which is like got to do a dog's head,
politics,
right?
Perception is reality for the most part of it. So
There you
got to
go.
put on a strong front. And I wouldn't say that just because we only have one person means we're giving anything up on the other end. It's actually just a way to be more efficient with the resources that we have. I don't need to be hiring someone to oversee everything they're doing in the first place.
Sure.
So
There are a lot of ways to win, a lot of ways to lose. No one right way.
yeah, that's right.
I think one of the biggest misconceptions that people sometimes have about the party is that the party has control over candidates, maybe. And so I know we've had times where we've had people come to us and tell us that we need to tell this candidate to do this or that. And that's not exactly the way it works. we're here to support them, but we're not going to tell them how to run their campaign.
They don't take your call and, you know.
No, they don't say, oh, yeah, okay, the state party said to do that. Okay, we'll jump on that. And then, of course, the idea about the resources that magically there's a large sum of money that drops into the state from someplace. And I don't think people understand how hard the state chair and all of the players, you know, in terms of getting in and doing call time and setting up fundraisers, and that money is worked. We work hard to bring that in. Sometimes I think that people are very disappointed that we're not handing checks over to candidates for their campaign, but to keep our infrastructure going, that's what we're working to get the money to keep the candidates
Reminds
supported.
me of that quote, might have been Roy Rogers, I'm not a member of any organized party, I'm a Democrat. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What misconceptions do you think people have about
You
the
know,
party?
I think one is the idea that we are policymakers somehow. I get everywhere I go, you know, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? You know, I remind folks I'm not elected to the legislature or to any official position outside of being chair. We don't set policy as a party, right? That's up to the legislators to do that and elected people. And it's one of my other mantras is that we want to elect people to office that put their oath to their constituents ahead of their oath to the political party. Oftentimes in modern politics right now, it's the other way around, and that's why we have so much polarization, is because we've sent people from both parties to these legislative bodies who actually put their oath to their party ahead of the people they were elected by. And so for us, we don't really engage in the policy discussions. That's not our job as a party. Our job is to support the candidates who are carrying our torch. The second piece is exactly what Vicki said, which is there's a misconception that somehow we control our candidates, right? I was the first state chair in the country to publicly endorse Hillary Clinton. I worked for Bill Clinton in '92, very close with Hillary, and all the time, wherever I would go around the country, people would say, well, you gotta call Hillary and tell her to change her message. Well, let me just flip out my cell phone. You know, there's some sort of perception that, you know, party chairs or others have more control over their elected officials or candidates than they really do, and it's the furthest thing from the truth. You know, again, our job is to build the infrastructure that they can be a part of. But you know, most chairs who try to tell their elected officials or candidates what to do aren't chairs very long. So.
That's interesting. Yeah, we should explore how you guys, you know, get your role and are elected or appointed to that. But before we head down that route,
She has a question.
oh, thank you.
I'm wondering if Mr. Joice could address the question about whether the Republican state or national committee exerts some control over its candidates.
Well, I'd agree with what they said, but just looping back to the beginning, you know, what we do and what I do is win elections. So I'm not here to tell you to vote this way or that way, but I will say if you're not on track with where the party's going or what the direction the party wants to go, there will most likely be a primary. And we're going to do everything we can. You know, I mean, we don't exert the type of influence that I know you're like wanting to fish for on this question, but that's really not what we do. We're not threatening our candidates, but our job is to win elections, and if the party is going in a direction, and that's the direction we'll go with winning elections. So.
And let me just follow up on that because I think it's important. We don't have unlimited resources, right? You have a finite amount of resources, and if there's a candidate who is not going to get on program and run a good campaign and put themselves in a position to win, then they're not going to be supported. And that's different from telling them what to do. It's just a reality, which is you have to make a lot of tough choices because all of us are dealing with, we don't sell anything. So it's not like we're making money. Every dollar that comes in is someone that's giving you money. Usually, you know, some person who's writing a $25 or $50 check. It's not big money. I mean, in aggregate, it's a lot of money. Millions and millions of dollars, of course. But most of it for state parties is raised from small donations. So we have to be really good stewards of that. And so for me, I don't have patience if a candidate expects us to invest in their campaign and they're not going to do the things they need to to put themselves in a position to win, we won't support them. And that's pretty much what I hear you say.
A much better way to put it. He's good at this.
There's another question back here. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead if you're, we'll get you.
Extending from the direction the two of you are going, could you get into what Citizens United has been done to the influence and the independence of candidates away from the parties?
Mm-hmm.
Who wants to tackle that one first? Remarkably, no one's making eye contact with me.
I'm a big supporter of move to amend, as are my two U.S. senators and most of my elected officials in our state. I believe that there is a real corrosive effect in both parties of big money, and I think the Citizens United was one of the worst Supreme Court cases we've seen, and we need to overturn that. Unfortunately, given current court appointees, that's not likely going to happen anytime soon. So there has to be a constitutional amendment, which I support, to overturn Citizens United. It's not just getting corporate money out of politics. It's really getting large contributions out of politics. I personally support public financing of campaigns. We need to get back to a place where people actually are having real debates on the issues. And there is a very corrosive effect of money in politics, in both parties. It's not one side or the other. Both parties, frankly, and we need to end that. So yes, I would like to see Citizens United overturned. It's not going to happen, so we have to amend our Constitution, and I hope that happens soon.
Let me jump in and kind of redirect this just for a second, because I don't want this to be a debate on the policy, right? Because we're not all going to agree, but how do you all raise your money? I mean, the candidates, there are 7 different sources of funds, right? You can call time, events, mail, email, digital, finance committee, political action committees. Amongst those, where does, you're the only man on the job. How does the Kansas Republican Party raise money? And I'm not looking for state secrets here, so in broad terms.
Well, just to direct towards the Citizens United thing a little bit, and like I said before, we're not weighing in on policy. Our job is to win elections. So we're going to do it in any way possible. So whatever the law will allow is what we're going to utilize and take advantage of. And if you're not doing that, then you're not doing right by the people in your party, your constituents, or the people you're telling that we're working hard to get your vote out. So, in Kansas, an LLC is another entity. So theoretically speaking, someone with 200 LLCs can write me a max donation check to my state account through every single one of those entities. So that's, it's things like that we utilize to make sure that we're raising as much money as possible. So like candidates, they typically are in that 2,000 to 5,000 range. That's kind of their wheelhouse. Ours is the absolute top and the absolute bottom. So, that 26,000 list of Trump supporters, if we can get $5 from each of them, that's awesome. It's a great, easy way to do touches, and it's a simple thing, and people are inclined to do it. What's $5? The president was just here. And then on the flip side, we can take 10,000 and 15,000 to our federal and state accounts. So that's those are the two levels that we hit when we're fundraising. In the middle ground, they're typically your more candidate-oriented donors, and they like to give to specific candidates rather than parties. So we kind of do the absolute bottom floor, and the penthouse is where we live.
Okay. As far as fundraising, it pretty much covers the same things that the candidates do. I mean, we're doing mailings, we're doing emails, we're doing call time, which is when you sit down and you just dial for dollars if you don't know what call time is, and just on people we know who are frequent donors, just give them a call every now and then. We do fundraisers. Those are we have people who are kind enough to let us into their home, and we bring in people and do fundraisers. We have surrogates from the DNC who will come in and offer a nice speech so that we can bring people in, and it's nice to see them. The Democratic Party, twice a year, we have a big convention, statewide convention, and that's usually a good fundraiser for us. But it's some of the same ways. We bring in money the same ways a candidate does. We're not out selling, cup holders or whatever things that say Democrats. But it's primarily the call time, raising fundraisers and
Okay.
same things candidates do.
Yep. Any different in Minnesota?
No. I mean, it's a slog raising money. We raise it online, mail, direct mail. We actually, at our party headquarters, when I came in, we remodeled it and we put a call center there, so I employ about 30 people.
Did you put in the plush leather chairs?
No.
Okay.
Every night we have about 30 callers who call around the state for small dollar contributions. These are $25 to $50 contributions. So we do our small dollar prospecting in-house. But we, I spend about anywhere from 3 to 5 hours a day on the phone, which is why I'm glad I'm here today, get a break.
I apologize to your finance director right now.
Right. But it's just, it takes a lot to raise money. And, just to go back to the point about the corrosive impact of money, it's not just the money, the source of money and where it's coming from and all the ties that it creates. It's also the fact that it takes our candidates away from talking to voters. Do you realize how much time congressional candidates have to spend? All they're doing is dialing for dollars. So when they're doing that, they're not talking to voters and engaging in meaningful conversations. So, and if you're in a swing district, the day after you're elected, you start your campaign for re-election and you start dialing for dollars again. So how does that help democracy? How does that lead to this big gulf, this polarization we have? How do we shrink that if we can never engage voters because all we're doing is raising money? Right? So we have to change that. Unfortunately, and Jim, right? That's Jim. Jim's absolutely right, though. And look, we raise a lot of money in Minnesota. And so every year someone comes to me and says, you got to sign a pact that you're not going to, this pledge that you're not going to take PAC money. And I said, look, I'm not going to do that until the law is changed for Republicans as well. Why would I unilaterally disarm, right? So that's not to say I don't have principles, but what it's saying is that the laws are what they are. And for us to win, we have to take advantage of those laws. We can't stand on principle and say we're not going to raise money because we believe it's corrosive, right? I do believe it's corrosive, but I also have to fund our efforts, and that means raising a lot of money. So it's a catch-22.
There was a lot there, and I had about 3 different routes I wanted to go down. But one of the things that at least I have seen and noticed over this cycle is the absolute influx of money in politics at the candidate level, right? Speaking just on the Democratic congressional side, there are 30 plus congressional Democratic candidates, I think, who raised more than like $2 million in a quarter. I mean, that's unheard of, right? A good quarter when I started was like, if you put together a couple $100,000 in a quarter, oh my goodness,
yes.
Right? Like you just made your career. Everybody wants you to go do things. That's a drop in the bucket to $2 million. Are you seeing that at the state party as well? Is that, and Vicki, I'll start with you. Have you seen an influx in donors and support?
Well, we're fortunate as Democrats in Kansas now to have 2 congressional districts that are very competitive, and we know that in order to compete, we have to have that money. And so yes, Congressional District 3, they big, millions, couple $1 million raised. And I don't know the numbers in CD2, but I know that, any place that you're going to be competitive, you're going to have to, a candidate's going to have to bring in a lot of money.
And has that translated to the state party? Is my question.
As far as the state party.
Are parties seeing an increase in those donations the same way candidates are? And I think this gets to the real crux of what someone alluded to is, we're a candidate-driven system at this point, right? And there's the influence of the party varies based upon the candidate, I think, who is at the head of that party. So has it translated that you've seen so far into increased enthusiasm?
We haven't seen the millions yet. No.
When you get one of those plush leather chairs, happy to take. There'll be 3 callbacks. That's 2.
But I think that, of course, closer to the election, we're seeing an increase, and the excitement is growing. But I don't see it just yet. I think and again, I think it's one of those things that as we build the infrastructure, as people see the importance of the state party, then if you build it, then they will keep sending the money, I guess.
If you build it, they will come. That's a great movie. Yeah, success breeds more success.
And if we win.
You know, one of the things is, we just saw a Senate candidate in Texas raise $38 million, Beto O'Rourke, in one quarter. I mean, that's staggering. It's good for him, obviously, but it's just unfathomable how much money is in politics. For state parties, the real challenge is you have your candidate campaigns, then you have parties, both state, national, and local party committees. You then have these independent expenditure groups. And what we've seen over the last decade is a huge explosion of outside independent expenditure groups. Some of them are dark money groups that are not regulated and, of course, running a lot of money through there. Political parties are the most regulated entity in politics, because all of us have to report to our state campaign finance boards, and we also have to report to the Federal Election Commission. And we have to do it on a more regular basis than the candidates even have to do. And so state parties, because of that, if you're a big donor and you don't want to have your money reported, where are you going to go? You're going to go to one of these outside groups, right? Or you're a big donor and you might want to give some to the party, but you don't want people to know exactly how much money you're spending in total. You're going to go to these outside groups. And what we've seen is, so you haven't seen, even though the amount of money that's being spent in politics has really exploded in the last 10 years, state and local party committees, because of how regulated they are not the beneficiaries of that by and large.
We raise money.
We raise, don't get me wrong, we raise a lot of money too.
Yeah, sure. And I guess the question, have you seen amongst small dollar contributors a change in this cycle from past cycles in your organization?
A little bit. We've introduced new candidates this year, so some of our donors just aren't familiar with giving to those people or aren't familiar with them in general, and they're not going to pick up their phone call. Some of our candidates are having that problem, so they'll give to the trusted entity, and the trusted entity can accept a higher amount anyway. So it's really more bang for your buck. And what we do and what we're always moving towards is just an ever expansive GOTV effort that just hits everything, and so. Why give $2,000 to a gubernatorial candidate when you can give me $25,000? And we're both working towards, again, getting Republicans to the polls. It doesn't matter who it's for. It matters that they're there. So it's more return on your investment. It's more bang for your buck, but it's definitely up to us to sell it that way and to have plans and to have an advanced ballot program, a chase program, and a GOTV effort that is sexy to those donors and does get them to pull out their checkbook. We're really proud of the work we do there. There's always room to grow. There's never enough money. But the IEs in the past.
Go to Beto O'Rourke in Texas.
Crazy.
Apparently he has a
That's
lot.
That's right. They're lighting it on fire.
So we're approaching our 45-minute mark. I want to open it up for questions, but the fundamental focus of this was, what is the future of state parties, right? How do they grow? A lot of traditional state party resources, programs, are starting, in my opinion, and please feel free to push back, are becoming more available outside the party apparatus, right? Now, the voter file is one of those that is still fairly, you've got to go through the party to get it. What, in 30 seconds to a minute, do you see the future of state parties over the next 5, 10 years? How do they grow, change, adapt?
In 30 seconds?
Yeah, just a huge, broad question about the future of our country in 30 seconds.
I think the state parties will be the important link for face-to-face and keeping it real with voters. We do have a lot of technology now that we can use to reach out to voters, but I think when you get into those counties and you get into smaller, rural areas in Kansas, that people still like to sit down and talk. And if politics is what they want to talk about, they like to get with other like-minded people and chat about what's going on for the day. And so I think state parties will still provide that means of keeping that communication more personal and giving people, and whether it's the house parties or getting together or just a monthly meeting with the county party. It's that opportunity for people to stay connected, and not connected online, but connected in real person.
It's almost a sense of community, is I think.
I think so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can see that.
You know, there's a lot of talk after the 2002 McCain-Feingold that would usher in the death of state and local party committees. But the reality is that the campaign finance laws are the exact reason why state and local party committees will always be relevant in modern politics. And part of that is because we are uniquely situated as one of the few entities that can coordinate with our candidates on multi-candidate expenditures. Our candidates need state parties, if for nothing else, because of those vehicles that we provide in terms of money and coordination. But I do think that state and local party committees on both sides need to understand what their lane is. And I don't know if it was Jim or Vicki who said it, we can't be everything to everyone, right? And state and local party committees used to be everything to everyone. And to Vicki's point, we need to figure out in each state, what is our lane? What piece are we going to take and own, right? And so for us, it's all of the field work, right? All the direct voter contact, all the get out the vote, all the ID and persuasion, right? We do that as a party, right? Sure, we run digital programs and have comms and earned media and all those other pieces, right? But really what our party in Minnesota is known for is we own those pieces. That's our lane. So anyone else that's in our state who's doing work knows, you know, do something else with your money, right? The party's got this piece. And that's the thing that every state party, if they want to survive, which they will, but if they really want to adapt and evolve, they need to understand that they can't be everything to everyone.
Spot on. You know, I like to think of us as ever expanding, ever evolving. It's kind of something we always say. You know, we need to be with the times and maybe even a step ahead. So to predict what it looks like in 10 years couldn't do that. You know, because hopefully in 10 years, whatever that would look like, we're already ahead of that. You know, we're a step ahead. But we know our lane, and so our lane is winning elections, and we kind of go on the opposite side of that and leave persuasion and more unique touches up to the candidates themselves, because they're better at it. They have trained staff that knows their talking points, which way to go, how to use these unique touches. You know, we're good at the masses and getting the base and the party people there. We leave the swings to our candidates, and that's, again, you know, a way to make sure that people are using their resources in the most efficient way. You know, they focus on the swings, we'll take care of the rest.
All right. Questions from the audience?
Thanks. Okay, so I'm going to try to combine a couple of my questions. So the first thing I want to understand is, what is the difference between the paid staff, which I guess would be the executive director, versus chair, vice chair, and that for each of the parties? And then how does that translate into who's ultimately in charge of the coordinated campaign? And I'd like to hear what each of you, or I'd like to hear each of you describe what the coordinated campaign is, because I think a lot of voters have different ideas of what a coordinated campaign might be at the state level and at the local level. Thanks.
Let me jump in. There's a lot there. There's good questions. And feel free to jump in and tell me when I'm wrong. The chair, the vice chair are elected by members of the party, and that can vary from state to state as the definition of member of the party. The executive director is hired by the party, usually at the direction of the chair, and that person is a paid employee whose full-time job is to execute, right? And that role can obviously vary state to state, entity to entity. For the coordinated campaign, I'm deferring to them.
You took the easy one.
Yeah. But I will say that we, in the campaigns that I've been on, the best description of a coordinated campaign was he who brought the most money directed the coordinated campaign.
Well, that's usually technically true, but you know, the whole purpose of the coordinated campaign, again, is to take advantage of campaign finance laws that allow the party to essentially spend money on multi-candidate expenditures. The rationale behind a coordinated campaign is that it's investing in infrastructure that is shared by all of the candidates, whether it's offices, all the candidates need offices, whether it's field staff, all the candidates need field staff, whether it's a get out the vote operation, right? So by collectively pooling their money, they're able to get more of a bang for the buck for all of the candidates in shared collective resources, right? And also eliminate duplication, because what you don't want is one campaign out knocking on doors and another campaign coming in knocking on the same door. Now, not every coordinated campaign works that way, and not every coordinated campaign is as efficient as they should be. But that's the genesis of a coordinated campaign. And back to the question about chairs, you know, it really varies. You know, I'm a full-time paid chair. I'm also an operative. I spent 8 years as chair, the last 8 years as chair. But before that, I spent 20 years running campaigns up and down the ticket, presidential campaigns all the way down to city council campaigns. And so for me, you know, there's a wide difference in the background of chairs. You have some chairs who come from academia. You have chairs who are business people. But my feeling is I would like to see all of our chairs be full-time chairs, because the nature of these jobs now require people who can really commit themselves to raising the type of money and getting out the message as often as they can. And so,
Well, I guess that would be, you know, my question on the difference between executive director versus chair, and how the responsibilities differ. And it sounds like they differ
Yeah,
in Minnesota.
it's going to depend state to state, party to party. As we said before, there's more than one way to win a campaign and lots of ways to lose.
that's right.
Anything you guys want to add on top of that hasn't been said?
I just, here in Kansas, as far as, now, we do have the paid staff that the executive director has helped us, or hires, and there's plenty to keep all of them busy.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had a coordinated campaign director who has been working with, and the goal is simply to set up those offices throughout the state, have people in western Kansas to know where they can go and get some training and get materials and things like that. So the coordinated it's just that big umbrella to make sure that we get everything out to people, and hopefully people trained well enough to know what needs to be done. And of course, we're coming up on our GOTV, and that's where we have to pull it all together and make sure it's as effective as possible to get out and get those voters to the polls.
The party of one?
Well, so like you said, you know, some of the chairs are paid, some of them aren't. Our chair isn't paid. You know, I'm really lucky to have Kelly Arnold, who's our chair, and Ashley Hutchinson, our vice chair. They're great people to bounce things off of, but the easiest way to separate us is that I'm here to win elections, and they're here to maintain the entire party. So like, they read the party constitution, and when people want to do amendments and things like that, or the party wants to send out a survey, things like that, they deal with. And I'm just focused on winning elections. So I think I got the better deal, to be honest. I think they have to deal with a lot of pretty interesting stuff. But they're awesome, and I think if we could make all chairs full-time and paid, it'd be great for everyone.
I think there was a question up front.
Hi, I was wondering if you could talk about how state parties work with the national parties, and what are some of the challenges and advantages of that interaction?
You're up first.
All the time. We talk to every single group all the time to figure out, what's the best way forward and what to do, and sometimes we're stuck being the bad guy, for the national groups. So there was an ad buy that was canceled in the 3rd district. That resources got shifted over to the 2nd district, and everyone's complaining. Why would you do that? Why would you reserve the ad buy in the first place if there was even a chance of rolling it back? So what we do is tell them what it's like on the ground, advise them, talk to them, give them an idea of the pulse of the state, and we went into it a little bit earlier, but where are you going to move the needle? And so, how much is $1 million going to move the needle in the 3rd versus how much is it going to move the needle in the 2nd? The press and some other people could frame it in a way that the party's giving up on Kevin Yoder. really it's a gamble, and we think that he's such a good candidate, such a pro, raises money like it's nobody's business, and works the district better than anybody, that we feel comfortable that Kevin has the resources in place and he's the candidate in place that he can run a self-sustaining campaign where resources might be better spent in other campaigns or startups or less known entities. So it's the bad guy, sometimes, but it's always good to communicate with those folks and make sure that everybody, the left hand is working with the right hand.
Of course, as chair or vice chair with the party, we're actually voting members of the DNC. So we're always, and it's going to the conventions and being part of how, and of course this year we had a great reform for the Democratic Party. So having a part of that and being connected with the national party that way. But then when you get into the election cycle, it is about communication and making sure they know what our needs are, and who our candidates are and chances. And then of course they're always taking the temperature of what's going on where. So this year, as far as Kansas, we've been getting a great deal of help from the national parties, and I think that's something that we're building here in Kansas. We had a good year in 2016 in terms of flipping some legislative seats, and that's helped prove that we're worth the effort. They need to start investing in us, and I think we're seeing more of that happen, which is good.
I'm glad to hear that. So I'm a vice chair of the Democratic National Committee in addition to my role as a state party chair. My specific duty for the DNC is as a president of the State Chairs Association. And so our association essentially acts as a union, for lack of a better word, for all of our state parties. And we collectively bargain for resources from the DNC. And so as you heard me say earlier, one of the first things I did after Chairman Perez and myself and others were elected in Atlanta in February of 2017 is write a plan on a 50-state strategy on steroids. How are we going to have a much more meaningful, impactful, and robust investment in state and local party committees? And that has resulted in a very significant series of grants and resources that come out to the state party every month, right? As part of that, we expanded out our staff, and so we have regional staff that essentially work directly with all of our state party chairs and vice chair. And I did want to acknowledge the fantastic state chair from Kansas, who's my friend and colleague, John Gibson, here from Kansas Democratic Party chair. Thank you for being here, Chairman. I get to work very closely with Chairman Gibson and Vicki here, as well as all of our other state party chairs and vice chairs. So we have a very close relationship. But our job always is to be asking for more, right, from the DNC. How can you support us? They raise a lot more money, and again, how can we make sure that there's some equity in those investments, but also some long-term thinking so that we're building up the infrastructure all over the country. And that's really what we're really focused on right now, and I'm proud of Chairman Perez's leadership. I didn't support him when he ran. I supported one of my best friends and colleagues, Keith Ellison, who ran for that position. But I've become a huge fan of Chairman Perez because he understands, like Howard Dean did before him, that the way forward for Democrats is to build throughout the country and to not take any one, not just write any one place off, but to really start making those investments.
First, I'd like to give a report from the courthouse. Over 400 Douglas County citizens have already voted today.
Yay!
Great.
First day.
That's awesome.
This is a question for Jim. You've identified yourself as a party of one. I'd like you to talk about the party of two, which is the current Republican Party in Kansas. And how do you reconcile the differences between the moderates and the conservatives?
I like that. Thanks. We're being recorded, right?
We are being recorded, and to be fair,
Careful.
just to make certain the pain is equal, I'll ask Vicki and Ken to answer the same, because I realized when we came out here, you're in a different position in Kansas. Republican Party is fairly dominant. I don't think that is a arguable fact. If we had the Massachusetts Democratic chair here, or the Illinois state chair here, the viewpoint is different, being where the state is politically. So, yeah, how do you balance the competing interests?
Well, we talked a little bit about that, or I hinted towards it a little bit earlier, and that is, again, one of the why I think I've got more perks being executive director than chair. You know, I'm not voting on these amendments on the Constitution. I haven't even read it for the Kansas Republican Party. But that's the neutrality in the primaries. You know, so I personally had my own favorites in the gubernatorial primary. I was working for one of them for a time being. But again, you know, I'm not elected. The voters didn't elect me. They didn't ask me to tell them what direction the party needs to go in its primaries. The board told me to win elections. So I'm taking the hand that's been dealt. And I think the voters, you know, decide the direction that our contested primaries go, and I think that's how it should be. And, you know, every now and then it's contested and it gets heated and there's bad blood, but for the most part, you know, our folks are pros and they're class acts. And, you know, Governor Collier, he could have gone into a lawsuit. We thought we were looking at quite a few more days of a primary than what we had, and he endorsed nominee Kobach at our office the very next day. So, you know, we've got class acts on our side, and we rely on them heavily to do the right thing, and we've been blessed to have that so far. But I personally don't weigh in on the primaries, neither does the party. So we just take the hand that's been dealt. That's a tough question.
Vicki, I mean, the split within the Democratic Party is also apparent in people who want us to be. What split? Yeah, come on. You know, further left or more moderate. How do you balance this out?
And I think we've seen some of that here in Kansas, you know, because, and it was as a result of the 2016 primary and the Hillary people and the Bernie people. And so there have been some challenges here in the state of Kansas, that we have some people who are definitely on that progressive path and following Bernie, and then we have the more traditionalists. And it really is trying to just give an ear to everybody, listen to what people need, and then, you know, we can only go one direction, but we want everybody on board to go that direction. So sometimes it's a balancing act, but you know, when all is said and done, we're in this for the same reason, and that's to get Democrats elected. So we have to find the best ways to utilize each part of the game talent. You know, so with the progressives and some of those, the energy level may be really, really high, and they could be our best canvassers. How do we best utilize them? And some of the more traditionalists, some of the people who've been with the party for a long time, they may be our best donor, class. So it's listening to what their needs are and then bringing them all together so we can move forward to get more Democrats elected. So.
Yeah, you know, look, there's obviously the cleave in our party was on full display in 2016, and in the months after. I was proud as an officer of the party to not only lead the charge, but to be the chief author on the superdelegate reform that passed in Chicago. And one of the reasons, as you heard me say before, I was an early supporter of Hillary Clinton's the first chair to support her. My state in Minnesota was a 62% Bernie state. I started in politics 28 years ago with a bushy-haired college professor named Paul Wellstone. I identify more with his politics. I'm a progressive, and I don't mind saying that. But we are a big tent party, and I believe passionately in that. I also, you know, I fondly recall another hero of mine, Ann Richards, saying, you know, that she was a yellow dog Democrat, right? If there were a yellow dog on the ballot with a D next to its name, she would vote for that person, that dog, any day over a Republican. No disrespect, but that's me, right? I believe passionately in our party, even people that I might disagree with. We have to make space for people. We have to let people know that we're a big tent party. And I think part of the challenge, not to go off course here a little bit, but in 2008 when President Obama won, he won with what was called the Rising American Electorate. Young people, communities of color, new Americans, the LGBTQ community. And after that election, our party, both our campaign arms and our legislative arms, almost focused exclusively on those groups. And as we headed into 2016, right, we lost a lot of working class voters, a lot of rural voters, a lot of union members. So
after the 2016 election, we heard from folks, oh, we got to go back and get all those people. We have a tendency to overcorrect as the Democratic Party. And I go back to my mentor, Paul Wellstone. Paul could go into southern Minnesota and talk to the farmers in corn country. He could go up to the Iron Range and talk to the miners on the Iron Range. He could come into the inner city and talk to immigrants and communities of color. He had the same message. The same message, because he understood what united all of those folks was a message around economics and the American dream. His slogan was, we all do better when we all do better. So I think for the Democratic Party, we have to continue to be a big tent. And we have to realize that there's space in that tent for all these voices. And then what we have to do is not try to just appeal to one side or the other. What we have to do is stand up and fight for everyone. I believe if we do that, that's the path forward for the Democratic Party. I truly believe that. We are in the wilderness right now. By the way, if you're not listening to that podcast, you should. If we are in the wilderness right now, but I am convinced that we are coming out with strong leadership, bold ideas, and I thank Bernie Sanders for that, and I thank other progressives who are going to lead the way on that.
Into the Wilderness is a podcast
by John Favreau. You should listen to it. It's all about the Democratic Party after the 2016 elections. It's great.
It's fantastic. Are there any other questions for the audience? We're running a little long on our time, so getting nods in the back from the staff. Like, yeah, wrap it up. All right. So every guest's favorite part of this interview is when we ask you the last question. What is going to happen this election cycle? And we're going to keep it very broad. We're not talking about specific races. How do you see the makeup of the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate after this election? Who controls each legislature? Congratulations, you get to go first, Kerry.
Well, let me just say that I think the odds are on the Democrats taking back the U.S. House. I don't believe in blue waves, and so, but if there is a wave election like we saw in 2006, it could be by a fair number of seats. I don't think it's likely, given what we saw after the Kavanaugh hearings in the swing in many of the red states. Of course, the Senate map is very difficult for us to begin with. I don't think we'll take back the Senate, but I do think that we're not going to lose as many seats as the Republicans think. Democrats are in a good position to pick up a number of governorships around the country as well as state legislative chambers. And so, we have a tendency to always focus on Congress, and that's okay. But for me, where we're really focused right now is on those local races, on legislative races, because those are really going to be important as we go into redistricting into 2020. So.
I don't believe in blue waves either.
Hopefully you don't believe in red waves.
Well played, sir. Well played.
Serve that one up. But so I'd say if we lose a seat in Kansas, we definitely lost the House. Take that to the bank. Pretty bullish on the Senate. I think it'd be pretty tough for us to mess that one up, but it's always possible. Right. There's never a dull moment, so who knows what could happen. But focusing down on the legislative races, I think that's where we're really strong in the Kansas Republican Party, and that again just loops back to it's not about a certain seat or a certain candidate or a certain issue. It's about getting those folks to the polls. So that helps us top to bottom on the tickets, and then redistricting. I mean, that's the one that it's inside baseball at the moment, but if you're not thinking about that, you're definitely not strategizing. So redistricting is going to be very, very important.
Oh, I would tend to agree with Ken. I think that Democrats have a good shot at the House, taking over the House, and I think that Kansas has a really good shot of being a part of that. Yes. We're looking at least one, maybe two. And the governor's race here, I think, as Democrats, we have a really good chance in turning something around there. Kansas kind of alternates from Republican to Democrat, so I think it's our turn now.
Is that how it works?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
It is. We rolled the dice.
We'll discuss this more later this evening. That'll be a whole other 2 hours if we get into this, and I promised we weren't going to do issues and races. So, thank you all very much for coming, for answering our questions, for helping us and give a little insight to how parties work. Appreciate it. Rock Chalk, thank you very much.
Rock Chalk.
As a reminder, next week is the last week. Can't believe it already. It is what the heck is going to happen, which is a very narrow topic, right? Marlon Marshall, who is a Kansas grad, great guy. He's on the board here at the Dole Center, is going to be one of our guests, as is your fellow DNC Vice Chair, Michael Blake, who is a New York Assemblyman. And we're hopeful to add a few more guests onto that before. If you haven't met Michael Blake or Marlon Marshall, you should. They are very engaging, very good political minds. Yes. We're going to have a lot of fun up here. I hope you'll come back. As always, if you're a student and not part of the Student Advisory Board, you should talk to these two in the back about getting involved, because it's fantastic and a great way to build your network. So thank you all for coming. I hope we'll see you next week.